By the summer of 1916, the world found itself mired in the horrors of a conflict that had exceeded even the most alarming pre-war predictions. What had begun with expectations of a short, decisive campaign had evolved into a titanic struggle of attrition. Battlefields, once defined by cavalry charges and maneuver, now devolved into a static sea of trenches, barbed wire, and mud. Cities and villages faded from the maps, victims to the ceaseless artillery shells and unyielding offensives. The grueling Battle of Verdun had raged since February, producing a staggering harvest of casualties, over 300,000 French and German lives lost for a few scarred kilometers of ground. And by July, the Somme battlefields would see losses climb even higher, adding another 1 million souls to the conflict's toll. Behind the maps and headlines, doctrines of victory at all costs began to collide with the somber reality facing Europe's people and leaders. Nations were straining under the unimaginable human and economic costs of war. In Germany, the effects of the British naval blockade grew severe. Shortages of food and raw materials led to hunger and unrest. British coffers, long viewed as deep and enduring, were quickly draining, while France mourned a generation decimated at Verdun and beyond, a national trauma felt in every village and city. The illusion of the war's sustainability was rapidly fading. As battle lines remained stubbornly fixed, political leaders began searching for another path. It was during this critical juncture, in August 1916, that France's President Raymond Poincaré journeyed to meet King George V at the British military headquarters in Val-Vion. The king welcomed his guest dressed in the crisp attire of a field marshal, but Poincaré arrived in black, a silent emblem of his nation's grief and exhaustion. In the privacy of their encounter, Poincaré confided what he could not say in public. He favored resolving the war as soon as possible. The pressures weighed heavily, and he understood the limits of French endurance. Only American mediation, he believed, might offer an exit that could be presented to a hopeful but unsuspecting French public. Unknown to the Allies, discontent echoed similarly in Berlin. Barely a week after Poincaré's quiet revelation, German Chancellor Theobald von Bethmann-Hollweg reached out discreetly to his ambassador in Washington. His cable was astonishingly frank. Germany, exhausted and aware that outright victory was slipping from its grasp, welcomed President Wilson's mediation. The German leadership, even the Crown itself, was prepared for compromise, contemplating the restoration of Belgian independence, a long-held demand of the Allies. Yet, mindful of both public opinion and the military, they guarded this overture with utmost secrecy. Across the Atlantic, the White House became the focus of rising expectations and anxieties. President Woodrow Wilson, a leader committed to neutrality but also to global progress and order, had cultivated back channels with both Allied and Central Powers diplomats. His confidant, Colonel Edward House, had already explored mediation possibilities with the British Foreign Secretary, Sir Edward Grey, resulting in the clandestine House-Grey Memorandum in February 1916. Here, the Allies stipulated that if Germany rejected American peace efforts, the U.S. might join the war, placing delicate leverage in American hands but leaving Britain to decide when such overtures should be made public. The House-Grey Agreement presented a framework for a peace that, in retrospect, seemed almost gentle by the standards that would ultimately be imposed. Belgium restored, Alsace-Lorraine returned to France, Russia guaranteed passage to the sea. House and Wilson hoped America could shape a post-war order without the U.S. becoming a belligerent, balancing international justice with national interest. However, Wilson hesitated. With an upcoming presidential election in the fall and a campaign centered on his role in keeping America out of war, the risks of launching a peace conference were palpable. Appearing too eager for negotiation or otherwise failing at mediation could undermine his domestic position and perhaps even embolden the warring powers' hardliners. Meanwhile, another, less visible but not less critical thread was unspooling in Vienna. The death of the aged Emperor Franz Joseph in November ushered in the brief reign of Charles I, who had fought in the war's bloody trenches and was deeply unsettled by the human cost. Charles, together with his wife Empress Zita from the House of Bourbon-Parma, looked for a way out. Zita's brothers, Prince Sixtus and Prince Xavier, serving in French and Belgian uniforms respectively, became inadvertent bridges between enemies, a rare channel for personal diplomacy amid impersonal violence. The U.S. presidential election of November 1916 delivered Wilson a narrow victory and the political freedom to act. But by then, the situation was shifting rapidly. Germany enjoyed significant military success in the Balkans by overrunning Romania, prompting its generals to reconsider negotiation. Sensing new possibility for outright victory, the German High Command pressed Bethmann Hollweg for bolder measures, even as he tendered a public peace offer in December. Yet, the offer, put forth with ambiguous terms and a tone suggesting magnanimity more than defeat, was met with skepticism and rejection by the Allies. Wilson, determined not to lose his opportunity for mediation, acted at last. He sent notes to all parties, asking them to clarify their war aims. Germany refused, fearing that frankness might ignite unrest at home and sap morale. The Allies, emboldened, released a catalogue of ambitious demands, including Germany's withdrawal from occupied lands and the return of Alsace-Lorraine to France, terms difficult for any German leader to accept without collapse. Standing before the U.S. Senate on January 22, 1917, Wilson gave voice to a nearly unprecedented vision. He called for peace without victory, a settlement that would spare Europe the furies of vindictive treaties and pave the way for a lasting, principled international order. Yet this plea, though lauded by some, found little resonance with men locked in life-and-death struggle for national survival. Simultaneously, Emperor Charles III launched his own initiative through the Sixtus Affair. With Zita as intermediary, Charles sent word to her brother Sixtus, now in the uniform of the French allies, to begin secret conversations. The price set by France and Britain was high. Alsace-Lorraine returned, Belgium liberated, Serbia restored, and Russian ambitions recognized. Still, Charles pressed on, energized by his vision of saving at least his Habsburg Empire and perhaps all of Europe from ruin. Yet as these maneuvers took shape, entrenched forces worked against them. In Germany, the generals, most notably those in command of the Navy, convinced the Kaiser that unrestricted submarine warfare could break Britain before the U.S. could mobilize. Chancellor Bethmann Hollweg, fearing the consequences, protested in vain. By February 1917, Germany announced the renewal of its submarine campaign, knowing it would likely provoke the United States into war and rendering further mediation impossible. The repercussions were immediate. Wilson broke diplomatic relations with Germany in early February, but fate delivered another blow. The infamous Zimmermann telegram, proposing a German-Mexican alliance against the U.S., was intercepted and made public, crystallizing U.S. opinion in favor of war. All possibility of a negotiated peace evaporated. Yet even then, Charles I pressed ahead. He sent another desperate promise, this time in writing, to support French claims on Alsace-Lorraine, if only Austria-Hungary could be spared disintegration. But the tides of war and politics moved swiftly. On April 2, 1917, Wilson sought a war declaration from Congress. A few days later, America joined the conflict. The aftermath of this missed moment echoes through history. Continuing the war into 1918 brought more than 1 million new casualties. The Russian autocracy fell. Bolshevism took root, reshaping the 20th century. The harsh, punitive terms of the Treaty of Versailles left Germany embittered, a wound soon exploited by the Nazis. Austria-Hungary, Charles's ancient dominion, fractured into new, fragile states. Ever since, historians have pondered the road not taken. If those secret overtures and initiatives in 1916 to 1917 had succeeded, might there have been no Nazi Germany, no World War II, no Cold War? Might the Russian Revolution have been averted, and Austria-Hungary preserved, at least in reformed guise? Insightful new work like Philip Zelikows' The Road Less Traveled now casts a spotlight on these lost opportunities. The failed negotiations of 1916 to 1917, long shrouded in secrecy, stand as a profound lesson. Wars, rarely ended in victory alone, sometimes demand that stubborn men risk peace. Today, the silent rows of gravestones and the scarred landscapes of former battlefields remind us how much hangs upon the choices of a few and the openness, however fleeting, to negotiation and reconciliation. For in those crucial months, as the world stood at a crossroads, decisions made in private would go on to shape the lives and the destinies of millions still unborn. If you enjoyed this historical journey, please support our channel by liking, subscribing, and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Don't miss our upcoming content.